I know this episode has raised quite a number of legal issues which we're going to explore in a while. But from what you know and from having dealt with these sorts of issues before, what for you is the kind of environment, shall we say, that sort of contributes to what we've seen at this particular school?
I would start by saying that the code of silence at the school, which we during our investigations found, and it was also found by the MEC's second attorney, which he appointed, the code of silence is there to keep the children silent about the atrocities happening at the school. For instance, they call it the Parktown Way. What happens at Parktown stays at Parktown. Snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. If you cry, you die. What happens on camp stays on camp. The moment that child reports it to his parents and the parents complain to the school, the child is picked out and targeted like you won't believe. That is one of the main concerns, is the fact that the children are too scared to speak out because they are scared of intimidation and victimization.
Look, how are these codes, like really maintained and promoted? I mean, the things that Frieda was talking about. How do these networks, work at the school to ensure that, there is that veil of secrecy?
Well, one of the big things in these cases is the fact that there's a violation of certain boundaries. So, for example, there will be DP put on genitals or penises pushed into faces. And those things come with, for example, quite homophobic, kind of attitudes. It comes with the fact that I don't really have anyone to turn to. If I tell people, I'm the one to blame because it's a shame, why did they pick me? So there's a whole kind of code that goes around the fact that certain kinds of behaviors we don't talk about. If we go back years, there wasn't even a language for this kind of abuse. So you go back to the 80s, people didn't know how to talk about abuse. Certainly men didn't know how to talk about abuse, and certainly about abuse between men. And we still don't talk about sex and sexuality in very constructive ways. Insert that into a system where you've got, for example, a hostel, where the whole system closes in. You get told what time to wake up, what time to sleep, what time to eat, when you can go out, who you can go out with, etc. That total institution becomes a closed unit within the sexual pathology that allows it to continue.
Have these methods kind of changed or been refined over time, perhaps to escape scrutiny?
I think they've become more entrenched. So, as Luke said, it starts off very subtly in, for example, initiation. And over the years, the initiation takes a different angle and a more acute angle all the time. So over a period of time, it is changed drastically. Like Luke said, putting deep heat onto a person's testicles. Because of the silence, you do not know as a pupil at a school what the people before you experienced, because it's never discussed. So there's opportunity for people who would like to take advantage of the situation to be able to move and shift the dynamics to become more and more sexual over a period of time.
Are there legal provisions, Frieda, to take care of this situation as the law stands?
Obviously, the first one and the most important one is the Constitution of South Africa, and more specifically, there is a section in the Bill of Rights protecting the rights of children, protecting them to be in a safe environment, not to be violated, not to be sexually abused, basically. It includes everything. Then we also have the Schools Act. We've got hundreds of acts covering the rights of children, and we also have case law.
But whose job is it? Whose job is it to make sure that that Constitution, that Bill of Rights, is in fact a living document, and schools are not only aware of the provisions, but actually live by those laws.
Definitely the government through the Department of Education.
Is it doing what it's supposed to do?
I don't think so, no. I believe not.
Is that your sense also?
Look, I think that there's two primary issues. You must remember the power of abuse lies in the secret, and the abuse has a whole set of meaning to people. So Section 54 of the Sexual Offences Act is extremely clear. Anybody who knows a child has been sexually abused must report it immediately to the police. Failure to do that is a crime.
But because of the things you've mentioned, people don't come forward.
Well, I think there's a second. That's true, and I think there's a second layer to that. When you've got a set of old boys rotating in from school into the hostels, into the school, there's a sense where what is normal outside is not normal inside anymore. So there's a blurring of normality. So even the adults who are charged with reporting the cases don't report them to the police because it's an internal self-sealing structure, as I mentioned earlier. So those people have actually committed a crime because they haven't reported. There's a crime being committed against the children, and you've got an accused person who's quite clearly sexually predatory and pathological and so on, inserted into a system where the people don't disclose because the people above aren't going to tell because they didn't before.
Now, you have these adults, right, who are part of the system, and I'm including here teachers. I'm parking for a second, like, the boys, and I suppose the girls were part of it all. There are these people, like we had the water like polo coach. What are the schools obliged, or what can, maybe that's what I said, let me not be legalistic perhaps about it. What can the schools do to break those networks, but to hold those people accountable? It took a long time for the water polo coach, for example, to be exposed. What can we build into the system as it currently operates to make sure that those people are not only exposed, but face the might of the law expeditiously?
I think let's go back a few steps and say with the parents. It's very important as parents that we have the conversation with the boy child, that we have conversations with the girl child. A lot of boys are never exposed to or never spoken about sexual abuse or anything that can happen to them. And that's why a lot of boys are not coming forward, is because society believes it doesn't happen to boys. So it also starts with the parents being able to have that open communication with their child. For the school, it is, again, it's this culture of silence. So being able to speak up, and like the boys in Parktown who have spoken up, to me are much better men and greater men, and are the heroes of this situation that we're in. But society and the schools and everybody don't look at them like that. I honestly believe they're the heroes. They're better than any sporting hero great that the school has produced. These boys are equal, if not better, because of this, the risk that they took for exposing. And the schools need to, as Luke said, this network is very closed. It's a very closed network. So you need to make sure that the teachers are, again, the teachers who are pupils, and then became old boys, and then became that. It's like a secret society, virtually like, as Luke once mentioned, like the Freemasons. It's a secret society. What happens there stays in there, and we're going to have to allow and accept that young boys can speak out.
Also, I suppose a school going out of its way to actually hide this or pretend it didn't happen, or to even because when one looks at the first report, for example, in the particular case we are talking about here, Parktown, and you look at the first report versus the second report, you're like, but it does appear like someone went out of their way to actually obscure the facts, to really push this, under the carpet. And then in those instances, how do we as a society or as a nation then say none of this should ever happen again?
Well, I can just confirm what Rees has said, and that is that the children must speak to their parents, and their parents must speak to them about speaking out.
Let's say this
And-
person, because that's like a bigger and wider sort of societal problem. It's not only confined to the particular
Yes.
issue we're talking about. There is that problem generally in our society. But how do we then compel schools to actually make sure that they don't do what I believe happened in the Parktown instance?
I can mention that we have been at the reading of the Harrison-Eupen report. We will be keeping a very close eye on what the Gauteng Department of Education is going to do about the findings in that report. And I think ultimately the only way to stop this is via the courts. I agree with you that with the first report, things were just swept under the carpet. Who the perpetrators are, we don't know. And they are protected by their colleagues.
Politicians always or often disappoint us, Luke, and the law can't really take care of everything that needs to be done. What do we do?
Look, I think one of the big things we need to be thinking about is that, and it happens a lot, it happens in conversations about gender, conversations about race, that if you change something and somebody gets empowered, doesn't mean the person who's not been empowered has been disempowered. So in other words, if we take something away from the traditions of Parktown in order to undo the secrecy, doesn't mean we take the pride of the great rugby and the pride of the great sporting. We're not trying to take something away from Parktown in terms of its tradition of academia and so on, which the MEC mentions all the time. It's one of the best performing schools. So we don't want to say because this exists, it's a binary argument that if we take this away, the whole of Parktown collapses, because it's not a good argument to say. So what I do think we do is we need to name the things that need to change. We come from a history, and we've had a lot of it, the Lost Boys of Bird Island and the Van Rooyen case that's coming out now. We've had a lot of things in the past that weren't good. We changed them, and we changed them for the better to protect the rights of people. We didn't remove something from somebody by empowering other people. And I think that's the binary nature of the discussion that these schools are having at the moment. We'll lose our tradition. That is not what we're saying. We're saying that certain elements of the tradition allow for offenders to insert themselves and allow for the pathology to flourish, not just exist, but to flourish. We want that removed. Your proud sporting tradition and all of that needs to be looked at in terms of what kind of social deviance does it actually encourage that leads to the abuse, and we need to remove those parts, not your rugby performance or your academic performance. And that's the hard conversation I think we need to have.
Mm-hmm. Rees, if we acknowledge that the things you said need to be done, or society has to do, parents in particular have to do, is what they have to do, but then we recognize that that is not happening as we speak. What can we do? What are the sort of things that we can do to begin, to whether you call it conscientize or, even if it's to nudge people to actually do the right things that will help them, their children, everybody?
I think education is important, and education of parents, education of the school itself, governing bodies, as well as the pupils. Letting them all know what their rights are, letting them all know what the risks are as a young boy of being sexually abused. A lot of parents, for example, have no knowledge about the grooming process and how the grooming process happens over a long period of time. How they also sucked into the grooming, because with a lot of boys, with most boys, the abuser is known to the child, the abuse is known to society, and the abuse is respected by the parents. So we need to start looking at an education. The schools themselves need to be able to having the conversations with parents and opening up, again, that closed community where they're not telling the parents and the teachers about what the law is and what the law entails. 5 years ago, we ran a conference and we invited every single boys' school in this province. We had 100 attendees at our conference. Not one school sent a representative to a conference on male sexual abuse of males. Not one of them did. So to a certain thing, all schools over there, and we've been talking about Parktown, all schools have had this, and it is happening in their schools. Because it hasn't come out in the media, because somebody hasn't spoken out, does not mean that it's not happening. I think if they really think, any of the boys' schools think this is not happening, they've got their heads in the sand. So we need to create the environment in the school and at home where parents can speak out. But it's also, as you said, in society itself. We need to acknowledge that the figures we use is 1 in 6 males are sexually abused and 1 in 3 females. The latest study in the University of Cape Town has actually put it at 1 in 3, both males and females. That's a South African study. So we need to accept the reality. We need to also take away the myths. And a lot of the myths behind sexual abuse of males actually stops males coming forward either later on in life. So for example, CSI, they always say, oh, we're looking for a 35-year-old single male who was sexually abused because now we're looking for the predator. It's not so. It's not so. And then you get other, because this is now in society, we start believing it. So people start believing that if you were sexually abused, you're going to actually become an abuser.
An abuser yourself.
Can you imagine if all the women who were sexually abused in South Africa become abuser? We'd have a society where everybody would be abused.